Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Action for Abolition workshop. And thank you all for joining us today for what I imagine are the more fun workshops of the day. Don't let me down, Ralph and Felice. My name is Alex Jassett, and I work for Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, and with the Back from the Brink campaign. And I will be facilitating today's workshop. Housekeeping. Please keep yourself muted unless you're called on to speak so that we can minimize background noise and distractions. If you have any technical questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and any questions about content should be saved for the Q&A portion where we'll invite people to ask their questions directly. And it is my pleasure to introduce our two presenters, both experienced nuclear abolition activists who will walk us through different types of protests, the lessons learned from past demonstrations, and answer any questions you have to get you started or keep you going. So first off, we have Felice Cohen-Japa, who is the co-coordinator of the Nuclear Resistor. And then we have Ralph Hutchison, who is the coordinator of the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance.
What do we mean when we say action? Try to share this. There we go. So there are lots of kinds of actions. You'll see many examples of them in this slideshow. There's road blockades, banner hangs, incursions into the weapons sites, street theater, marches, dramatic actions, celebrations, media events, arrests, vigils, creative moments. Some of them clearly are edgier than others. But one thing that they have in common is they're all designed to send a message. So during the workshop today, we want to talk about the elements of planning, preparing, and pulling off a successful action. For some of you more experienced people, this might be sort of elementary stuff. We hope it's a nice refresher. You'll notice that some of the pictures in this slideshow have been less exciting moments, like people planning or creating or practicing for their actions. And we've included them because they're just as much part of the elements of a successful action as the action itself. So no matter what kind of action you find yourself contemplating, most of the fundamental elements of pulling it off successfully will be pretty much the same.
Thank you, Ralph. This is really an exciting time for nuclear abolition work. As many of you know, on January 22nd, when the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entered into force, there were well over 80 actions in the US alone, with many more around the world. Here's an edited version of a video we made to highlight the US actions.
Now I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun. Yes, I've been smiling lately, dreaming about the world as one, and I believe it could be someday it's going to come. 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. 'Cause I've been smiling lately, thinking about the good things to come. And I believe it could be something good has begun. The peace train sounding louder, glide on the peace train. Come on, peace train. It's peace train, holy roller. Everyone jump upon the peace train. Come on, peace train. Now get your bags together. Go bring your good friends too. 'Cause it's getting nearer. It soon will be with you. Just come and join the living. It's not so far from you. And it's getting nearer. Soon it will all be true. Peace train sounding louder. Ride on the peace train. Come on, peace train. Peace train. Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. A peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Peace train sounding louder, ride on the peace train. Come on, peace train. It's peace train, holy road.
Really inspiring. So we've invited Kathleen Sullivan to share with us some of the wonderful actions that happened in New York City to mark the entry into force of the Ban Treaty. Kathleen is an author, filmmaker, and educator, and the director of Habakasha Stories. Kathleen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Felice. And that video just brings tears to my eyes. Thank you so much for all of us that have been so engaged in the entry into force action. So I have just a couple of minutes, and I thank Felice and Ralph for letting me come in here. Now I'm going to try to find my screen here. And this is just to give you just a little idea of some of the things that we got up to in New York. Can you see that okay on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as Felice said, I'm coming to you from Hibakusha Stories. We bring atomic bomb survivors into New York City classrooms to help them understand the firsthand witness of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Here is Setsuko Thurlow on one of our many school visits. We've probably brought testimony to more than 45,000 high school students in the New York City area. We're part of a group called NICAN, the New York Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and we represent members of ICAN organizations, so ICAN members living and based in New York City. And we've been working on some really amazing legislation on disarmament. And to mark that, on January 1st, we had a polar plunge. Here is Emily Welty and Matt Bolton, two of our members. And here we are on New Year's Day, jumping into the Atlantic Ocean for nuclear disarmament. It was cold. I can tell you that right now. This is the great Eric McGregor, one of our esteemed photographers who's taking some photos there. And Brendan Fay actually went in for a full body plunge to talk about nuclear weapons are a war against the future. The disarmament legislation that we have before City Council is it's not back from the brink, but I think that's important to mention here because we're all working locally, nationally, and internationally, and we're all supporting each other. in this work. You can find out more about our legislation on the Hibakusha Stories webpage. And what we did was to highlight the entry into force, we took these illuminated letters around to different iconic areas in New York City. Here we are in Times Square. Here we are with the Brooklyn Bridge in the background. We wanted to create a lot of images for people to be able to use in their work and entry into force. Part of our legislation does recognize the importance of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and requests that New York City become an ICANN appeal city. But also, it being New York City, you know, they did not call this the Manhattan Project for nothing. Few people will recognize that a whopping 2/3 of the uranium that was used in the manufacture of the world's first nuclear weapons were stored in the 5 boroughs of New York City. So our legislation also seeks to revisit those legacy sites to make sure that the environmental remediation that needs to be done will continue to be done. Here we are in Red Hook, Brooklyn. One of the things about our work in New York that's been so inspiring is crossover with other local activist communities. This is Sister Ladida, who is part of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and a member of GAG, Gays Against Guns. And NICAN and GAG have been working very closely together. I can also put in the chat, GAG Radio just came out with some two podcasts about the connections between small arms and nuclear weapons.
So, Kathleen, this is Ralph. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we really need to accelerate this because we need time for questions and answers.
Okay, excuse me. So here we are at the UN, where much of this went down. This is our beloved Seth Sheldon, who got a proclamation from the Manhattan Borough President declaring January 22nd ICANN Day. Seth also got several iconic buildings in New York City lit up in honor of entry into force. This is the World Trade Center, which many of you will be familiar with, and also some buildings in Midtown Manhattan, which were lit up in UN blue. We also had an event organized by Anthony Donovan, a march from the Catholic Worker down to the Isaiah Wall. And we also conducted this missions, Roses to Missions, where we visited all the missions that had ratified the treaty and brought them this lovely card and some roses. We worked very closely with Setsuko Thurlow, who's pictured here in an animation that ended up on the side of the Secretariat building, which is an action that we did in conjunction with Rise and Resist, a direct action group in New York City. And we, Ivy Arcee was our designer who got the animation up onto the Secretariat of the UN. And then we had Nuclear Weapons Now Illegal. This was taken from Setsuko's speech on the day that the treaty was adopted. Nuclear weapons have always been immoral. Now they are also illegal. We had them on the side of the UN building in all the official languages, as well as Japanese. And we did this in collaboration with the Illuminator. Big shout out to them. This was so surprising to people who, member states of the treaty that have their offices in around Midtown Manhattan, that Malta was watching. And this is an iconic building in Malta, which also took our illuminations and shined a light on some of their buildings. Seth Sheldon was very involved in getting Malta to ratify the TPNW. Finally, we just had an action that was around Valentine's Day, which is drawn from some work that we've done with high school students in Nagasaki, because I love. What we love is threatened by nuclear weapons. So we gathered together to say, because we love, we want our legislation to come through here in New York City. Again, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. This is Robert Kroonquist, my great collaborator, who was the mastermind behind the illuminations at the UN. And here's our beloved Ray Atchison. So because we love, and we really want to lead off with not so much what we fear, but that everything and everyone we love is threatened by the existence of nuclear weapons. So let us all work together to make sure they are abolished. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here and share today.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Felice and I are going to try to cover as many of the important pieces of preparing and pulling off a successful action as we can. Still leave some time at the end for questions. So a good action. A good action will not only communicate your message, it will energize your group and build your capacity. You can be recognized in a way that may attract more people and maybe even inspire some people to support your work with donations. All of that starts with really careful thinking about the action. And the first most critical piece is to be clear that the action is going to support the ultimate goal of your organization rather than just be a really cool thing that was a distraction. The action should be coherent. The audience who's going to see a brief 90-second piece on the evening news should not be confused about what they're looking at. They should get it, not only from the soundbite that you deliver in the interview, but also in the images of the action that they're seeing on the screen. We're going to talk today about planning an action in a way that encourages that coherence, but it's always up to you from the very beginning to ask the critical questions. How does this action deliver our message? And how does it advance our goal?
Who specifically do you want to reach with your action? Who's the target of your message and any demands you might have? Is it people working at a nuclear weapons plant or military base? Perhaps it's management at Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or other builders of nuclear weapons, or government officials. Maybe you have an arms fair scheduled in your city and your audience will be the war profiteers who will be attending. Or it could be that the aim of your action is simply to raise awareness in your community and educate the public, because public education about your issue should be the foundation of all that you do. So that's an initial decision that needs to be made. Think about who can deliver what you want and what is the most effective way to connect to that person. If you're demanding, for example, that your local university involved in nuclear weapons work stop that involvement, your actions will at least partially be aimed at the president of the university. Both Ralph and I live near two of the universities identified in ICANN's Schools of Mass Destruction report, and our groups have already written letters to the presidents of those universities. We also held banners on campus in January when the ban treaty entered into force. These actions are first steps in a campaign to put pressure on the universities.
So location, where are you going to do your action? This might be a simple decision. If you're going to say, challenge Bank of America to divest its holdings in companies involved in nuclear weapons, and you have a Bank of America office in your city, then that's a no-brainer. But sometimes you have to make a choice. Bomb plants, military bases, for instance, tend to be in out-of-the-way places. But wherever the location, there are some key questions you should ask, starting with how are people going to get there? And how much room do you need for parking? And what will be going on around you at that time? Will there be a lot of traffic? Will there be people going in and out of a building? Is it lunchtime? Is there a bus stop that will block visibility? Think about who else you might encounter. Security, police. These are all part of the location question, which you will need to scout out ahead of time at the time of day you plan to do your action. Then as organizers, you have a responsibility to think about safety. Is there space to assemble? What if your turnout is bigger than you expect? You can't assume that everything is just going to fall into place because you hope it will. You have to study your location, walk yourself through the action there. If you run into obstacles or challenges, that doesn't automatically mean you have to abandon that location. It might just mean that you have to figure out a good, solid workaround that particular obstacle or barrier.
Once you pick your location, it's time to talk about tactics. What exactly will people do? Make sure what you choose will move you towards sharing your message and achieving your goal. Maybe you want to display a banner and hand out leaflets at an air show with tens of thousands of people in attendance. You might want to have a die to remember the people who were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Perhaps you'll decide to form a citizens' weapons inspection team that will go to a military base that has nuclear weapons in order to conduct a search for weapons of mass destruction. There are a lot of great resources and handbooks. A lot of them are online that discuss a wide variety of tactics. And later we'll put a link to some of them in the chat box. What will the action feel like? What tone do you want to convey? And how will it impact the target and audience? If it's a Hiroshima and Nagasaki anniversary action, the tone, of course, will be very solemn. For the actions that took place when the nuclear ban treaty entered into force, there was a celebratory tone. When a group of us entered the construction site of the new Kansas City nuclear weapons plant, our aim was to stop construction by standing in front of the earth-moving equipment clearing the site. Although we were definitely angry that the new plant was being built, we wanted to dialogue with the workers at the site. So we chose not to convey an angry tone. Now to determine your message with a laser sharp focus. How do you make complicated issues understandable? It's not easy. Keep it clear, short, and simple. Many billboard design professionals recommend using no more than 7 words for a billboard, and that's a good rule of thumb when figuring out. Maybe a few more words are okay, but basically less is more. The message should reflect the tone and clearly communicate the purpose of your action and what you want to call attention to. I love this photo. It's an action in Idaho on the day of the ban treaty's entry into force. You look at it, and in one glance, you can see it's an anti-nuclear action. The tone is celebratory, and there's only one banner with very large letters reading "Nuclear weapons are illegal." Very effective. Once you've decided what your message will be, it's important for everyone to stick to it and to practice it and practice it again so you can easily articulate it during the action. After all your planning, you don't want people to bring signs about another issue they're passionate about or talk about another issue to the press or passersby. It will water down your message and it will confuse your audience. So it's important to stay focused on the agreed upon message.
So we've broken media strategy and messaging into 2 pieces because you can have a brilliant message, but if no one hears it because you didn't have a good media strategy, that's a fail. And the best media strategy in the world with a muddled message is also a fail. When we were planning for our January 22nd actions, John Pope of Rethink Media helped us because he was excited about the day and the treaty and the actions. So I'm sharing his advice about messaging and our media strategy. Media strategy has several parts. And these are the things that you do to get the media to amplify your message. More than one time during our actions, I've told reporters, I don't need you to be on my side. I don't need you to just tell my side of the story. I just need you to do your job. Because their job is to mediate, to be the go-between, to tell their viewers or listeners or readers who weren't there to see it what happened. Even if my action is in a public place, the number of people who see it will be relatively small, and some of them will be hurrying by, and the main impact will be, I wonder what that was about. I want everybody who didn't see it or who only got a glimpse to see it in the paper or on the news. And that's the media's job, to be the go-between. So here's how we help them do it. First, we have that clear, clean message. And then I make sure they know the basics of the action. So my media release starts with what every journalist is looking for: who, what, where, when, and why. In essence, my media release is writing their article for them. I include a couple of sound bites for quotes. Now I send them the media release well in advance, maybe 10 days ahead of time. If your event requires discretion, maybe you just send a teaser and embargo the information until the day of your action, or even the hour. But 3 days before the action, send your media release again. And then the day of. Don't feel bad about repeating it because different eyes are going to see it. John Pope said they won't feel nagged. They expect to be reminded. Now, 2 other things. If your event is on the weekend, there will be a whole different crew in the newsroom than the weekday crew. So you have to send your release to the weekend crew. And Another little tip is you can often find direct contacts for the camera people, the photographers in the print media. Send them the media release too with a note that there will be a good visual. Even if you can, timestamp it. We expect the banner drop to happen around 3 o'clock. Next, take care of the media on the day of. You have a spokesperson who is visible and identified, and that person will approach the media, not wait for the media to come and find them. They may have a list of interview subjects that they point out, or they may handle the interviews themselves. They might have a media packet with a fact sheet or background material, or even information about your group if you're a new group, or if they're a new media person. Also, follow-up, which Felice will talk about in a moment, is crucial. You can have other elements of a media strategy. If your event or action includes someone from out of town, see if the editorial board of the newspaper will sit down and talk with them. Also, have members of your group prepared. They can write letters to the editor. Mary Leah's group in California is superb at doing that. You can consider submitting an op-ed to the newspaper. Usually you get 600 words and you can say a lot, but stay on point. And I also can't stress enough, practice. Practice being interviewed so that you can stay on message. Even if the interview asks you a different question, you can come back to your message if you've practiced doing it.
Once you've figured out what your message is, then you get to decide how to broadcast it to the community and the world. What visual impact you want to have. You need to decide what your signs and banners will say and how big they need to be in order to effectively be used during your action. If you're hanging a banner over an overpass or on a building, it will need to be pretty large to be visible. So letters, graphics, colors should be bold, easy to read, and eye-catching. What sorts of props will further your message? Puppets and costumes attract attention, and they're a lot of fun to make. Perhaps you'll all wear the same t-shirt with a message on it. If your group decides to do a citizen weapons inspection, you'll have a special costume to make that clear. Here in Tucson, several peace groups came together to create a 10-foot tall puppet of Sadako to use in our anti-nuclear actions. Maybe you want to have music, or someone will read a message or statement out loud. During some of the actions that celebrated the treaty's entry into force, people took turns reading the treaty or reading out the names of each of the countries that had ratified it. One thing that you want to consider beforehand is how you will amplify your voices or any instruments. Also decide if you want to have leaflets to hand out explaining what your action is about, or perhaps you'll have a letter to the commander of the Air Force Base or CEO of Raytheon that you want to deliver, maybe along with a copy of the nuclear ban treaty if that's the focus and the message of your action. Whatever you decide to create for your action, it's important for all of these elements to be coherent and stay on message.
So when we're doing an action in Oak Ridge, even one we have done a dozen times before, we set aside time to go off with a couple of people from the planning committee the day before, and we walk through every single second of the action to visualize it like we're watching a movie. From the time I load the car until I get home, I want to know what's going to happen through the entire day, to arrange every detail ahead of time because something is going to come up that we didn't expect. So if I'm at the park a half an hour before the rally and I'm trying to figure out the lineup of speakers and musicians, and somebody comes up and says, the power isn't working, we don't have sound. Suddenly I have two things to do at once, when I could have figured out the lineup of the speakers and the musicians last Tuesday. So nail down every possible thing in advance. Thinking it through also means being honest about the obstacles and the risks and the possible problems. Sometimes for our actions, it means having a conversation with the police captain about the march route and exchanging our cell phone numbers. Sometimes it means making sure there's a SAG wagon and somebody to drive it in case one of the Hiroshima Day marchers fades in the August heat. And one thing I want to emphasize, if your action carries a risk of arrest, you have to be honest about that with everyone participating. In our civil resistance actions, we always have a nonviolence training, usually a full day, to go over the plans and know what the risks and charges might be and assign support people. It's a long list of things. It's a whole other workshop, and it's absolutely essential before you put someone at risk. So finally, we're here. I want to say it's okay to enjoy your action, but don't be flippant or cavalier in a way that will undermine your message. In most actions, the energy that you feel will be amazing. Remember, the people who are watching you, the police, the passersby, the media, everyone is part of your audience. If there are people observing, even police standing by, you have a chance to engage them in conversation. In Germany, we did an action where we walked onto the airbase in the morning and they detained us, and we waited a long time because they processed us one at a time. When we realized that some of the police who were guarding us spoke English, we chatted with them, where they were from, how long they'd been with the police. And after I talked with one young man a while, I said, "So what do you think about this base having nuclear weapons? You ever think about what it would mean to be target of an attack from Russia because you store nuclear weapons here?" And he was quiet for a moment and he said, "I never think of it before this morning." So you never know. Two other related things. Everyone stays safe. If necessary, you give up the action if safety is compromised. You can always come back another time, but you can't unhurt someone. And a corollary to that is to take care of each other. Could be as simple as monitoring everyone's fluid intake, or as careful as watching for signs of emotional distress and checking in, especially if things seem to be going sideways or taking longer than you thought.
You've now done your action. Maybe you live streamed it. Maybe people were tweeting photos and updates throughout, and maybe you got press coverage. Either way, there's still work to do. Media follow-up will give you more mileage for your message. After the action, you'll all want to relax and celebrate. So plan this follow-up work in advance and know who's responsible for doing what. You can have most of a press release ready to go beforehand with quotes from participants. And then you just need to fill in some details and add some action photos and videos along with photo credits. All of this makes it possible for the media to run your story, even if they didn't have anyone there to cover your action. It's important to get this sent out as soon as possible. You also have a wide open opportunity to present your action in a clear and interesting way on social media. I did media work for this blockade at Lockheed Martin in California. I wrote something for Facebook, keeping in mind the message of the action, and included a link to a longer report that I'd already posted on our website. The post was shared almost 100 times, and many thousands of people around the world learned about the action. Later on, you can also write and submit op-ed pieces, articles, and letters to the editor to let even more people know about your action and why you did it. Amplify your message however you can. You all worked hard to plan and prepare. You're feeling really good about the wonderful action you pulled off with great people, and it's time to celebrate. I'm usually really hungry after an action, so it's nice to have the opportunity to eat together, relax a bit, and have some time to process what happened during the action. People can share things that they found particularly exciting, or maybe something that happened that troubled or concerned them. Maybe one of you saw or experienced something that others didn't, like a conversation with one of the workers at the nuclear site that others will want to hear about. The debrief and evaluation doesn't have to happen the day of the action, but it shouldn't be too much later so things can be shared before they fade. It's an opportunity to talk about what the highlights were, what went well, what could have gone better, basically capturing lessons learned for the next action. And don't forget to congratulate yourselves for doing an action to help rid the world of nuclear weapons.
So here are some links to the resources, and Alex, I think, is going to post these in the chat that we used in preparing these materials. In the weeks and months to come, there will be a stream of activities and events building on the momentum of January 22nd. If you want to stay connected and learn about these things, join the Facebook group Nuclear Ban Treaty EIF and follow #NuclearBan. There's a longer version of the video that you saw about the January 22nd actions on Vimeo. Just search for Nuclear Ban Treaty EIF. And in just a second, we're going to go to questions and answers. But we realize we won't have time for all the questions. So there's contact information for both myself and Felice. That should also show up in the chat. We will take questions from you by email after this is over. Even if it's down the road, weeks or months later, and you're planning an action and you want to ask us, don't hesitate. So thank you for that. And I believe, Alex, we're ready to do questions and answers.
All right, sounds good. So we actually only have about 10 minutes for this. Hopefully, it says my connection is unstable. Hopefully, I stay with you. So just the way we'll run this is if you can just put the word question in the Q&A or in the chat, I will call on you and you can ask your question directly. Please keep yourself muted until I call on you, just to, again, minimize background noises. So again, just put the word question in all caps, type it into the chat, and I will call on you. And I guess before we get some questions, I have a question that I'm curious about. What are each of your most impactful actions that you've done on a personal level?
Go ahead, Felice.
Well, it's a little hard to pick one. Sometimes it has to do with just the people I was with. So I would say that the action that I mentioned in Kansas City, they were building the first nuclear weapons plant in my adult lifetime in the United States. And I felt strongly called to do what I could to stop it. And so there were about 14 of us, and we planned quite a bit, and we decided that we needed to go and block the equipment. And it was very moving. And so when I went back for the trial, we didn't get a lot of press coverage. So myself and others wrote articles that got shared in Common Dreams and places like that about why we did the action and why it was important to end the nuclear arms race, abolish nuclear weapons, and stop spending money on weapons of mass destruction. So I think that was one of my most important actions.
And I would say, and the other reason it's hard to sort them out is because of the wide variety of actions. It was very powerful for me one time when we were walking down the Broadway in New York City on the way to the United Nations right before the NPT review. And we started out with about 40 people, and a couple of other Buddhist orders joined up with us. And then as we walked down Broadway, we could hear drumming off in a distance get louder and louder. And different orders from all over the world of Buddhists and their supporters joined in the march, swelled to 100 and 300 and 500, and car alarms were going off. And it just was an elevating action. Suddenly you weren't sure whether your feet were touching the pavement or not. You were just being carried on in this wave of power. So.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we have a question from Anne. I don't know, I was looking to see if she was on here. She might have popped off, but I'll read the question out. How do you get a diverse population to participate in the actions?
I think it's a good question. It's also one that's hard to answer because we often don't get a diverse population to participate in our actions. Some of it depends on location. I mean, a lot of the actions that we do in Oak Ridge are at a nuclear weapons plant that is out in the middle of nowhere. But many years ago, I posed a very similar question to this to the Secretary of Energy, Hazel O'Leary, who was the first African-American Secretary of Energy that we had. And she said to me, she recognized the issue, but she said, in communities of color often have issues that are more emergent than nuclear weapons. And so she said, your job is to be an ally with those communities. So we came back and used some of our creative skills, our street theater, giant puppets. Now the hit of the MLK parade in Knoxville is the giant nonviolence champions that we have created out of paper mache to carry in the parade every year. And hopefully for us, that's building a bridge to another community that eventually will be responding when we say, hey, here's our action. We hope you can come and join us.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to keep going because we are getting a bunch of questions in. So the next question is from Marilia. So why don't you ask your question?
Hi, I'm interested in knowing if folks on this Zoom and in our communities beyond are interested in bringing the TPNW forward as a central part of our August 6th and 9th commemorations. I have ideas of how we might do that at the lab, even in virtual space or in hybrid space. But I don't want to talk about my ideas. I want to ask people. It's a kind of looking forward, looking back, and allows you to connect things. And are people thinking of doing that? Do people want to do some meetings, maybe do some joint media so that this is a national thing? And that's my question.
So Mary Leah, the easy answer is yes. The two things I would say about that is I think this process that we started for the January 22nd EIF, and you've been involved in that, I think is a piece of that moving forward is going to be days of actions. And that's certainly going to include how we're going to blend the TPNW into Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think one of the common elements, which I know you all have done and we have done in Oak Ridge in the past, is elevating the voices of the Hibakusha, which were really compelling in this whole effort to get the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons established. And I think, for at least for my money, that's going to become an even stronger part. That voice is going to become an even stronger part of our August 6th and 9th as we link it to their call for everybody to be signing and ratifying the treaty.
Marilia, thanks for that question. I'm already hearing about a lot of interest in terms of August 6th and 9th. And it's also good to remember that there's already, for the last couple of years, been actions where people have had a copy of the treaty, read it aloud, done actions with that as the focus of what they're doing at the Nevada test site, at that blockade at Lockheed Martin in California. There was a copy of the treaty. Almost exactly a year ago, there was an action, a blockade at the Bangor Trident submarine base where someone read the treaty out loud in the middle of the road. So that's already happening and definitely something that people are interested in.
As a purveyor, I'm hoping to hear, we're here to help, new groups who haven't thought of this before, new ideas. You know, I want us to build.
I think that Nuclear Ban Treaty EIF Facebook group, which provided a lot of resource options for January 22nd, I think we're going to keep that alive, and we'll continue to have resources, but hopefully, you know, you'll be contributing yours as well as the ones that we come up with. So yeah. So Alex, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we can do one more for Art's question, and then we're
Art
going to wrap it
actually
up.
followed the rules, so we should call on him.
Yep.
Art, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I just wanted to invoke Ardith Platte, who's been in some of these pictures and who's been arrested at the Pentagon for leafleting the TPNW treaty at least 3 times. And she died on September 30th. So we call her into our presence. I also wanted to just see how many groups that you're aware of that are doing an ongoing public witness vigil at nuclear weapon sites during the pandemic. We try to keep vigil at the Pentagon and the White House as best we can, but I'm just curious, during the pandemic time, January 22nd was an amazing, the video is just so amazing to see what people were doing around the world in the US. I'm just wondering what the ongoing effort is that you're aware of at the different nuclear weapon sites during the pandemic.
Well, I can say ARIPA maintains a Sunday vigil at the Y-12 nuclear weapons complex in Oak Ridge for more than 20 years now, and we have managed to keep that going during the pandemic. For a while, we were down to a single vigiler, but now we're up to 5 or 6 a week with masks and distancing and all. I don't know about other sites or facilities. Felice, maybe you know, or other people can put things in the chat if they know.
I think that obviously it's had a significant impact in terms of what people are doing or not doing. But there's a lot of places, well, the Pentagon and the White House, right, Art, where you regularly have a vigil, and at Vandenberg Air Force Base, Brandywine is still at Lockheed Martin. So we're aware of a lot of people that are just saying, stay physically distanced, wear a mask, be careful. But, you know, in terms of people risking arrest, which is, you know, on the edgier end of doing actions, it's not really a time that you want to be going to jail even for an afternoon to be processed and released. There, you can't be physically distanced there. So it's had an impact on some actions, but there's a lot still happening.
So Alex, thanks to Back from the Brink and
Thank you
ICANN
both.
and you for this great facilitation and the opportunity to do this workshop. And thanks for everybody who came. Great to see you and celebrate our community.
Thank you to both Ralph and Felice for leading us through this excellent workshop.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.